Kính thưa các quý vị đại biểu, thay mặt ban tổ chức, chúng tôi vui mừng được chào đón các quý vị đại biểu tham dự buổi hội thảo phát triển ngành dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu tại Việt Nam. Buổi hội thảo này là một hoạt động nằm trong dự án phát triển môi trường thuận lợi cho sự phát triển của ngành dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu phục vụ cho tài chính số do Tổ chức Tài chính Quốc tế (IFC) đang phối hợp thực hiện cùng Ngân hàng Nhà nước Việt Nam, Hiệp hội Ngân hàng Việt Nam và Cục Kinh tế Liên bang Thụy Sĩ hay còn gọi là SECO. Trong hơn 2 thập kỷ qua, các tổ chức tài chính tại Việt Nam và các nước khác đã đang dần chuyển đổi số. Tại một số nước, 90% các dịch vụ tài chính đã hoàn toàn được số hóa. Nếu không có dữ liệu thì tài chính số có thể không được xảy ra. Ngoài các dữ liệu về khách hàng mà các tổ chức tài chính hiện có và các thông tin cung cấp bởi các trung tâm thông tin tín dụng được cấp phép, hiện nay các tổ chức tài chính đã và đang ngày càng phụ thuộc vào dữ liệu của bên thứ ba cung cấp để tiến hành các hoạt động kinh doanh của mình. Bên cạnh các báo cáo tín dụng, các dịch vụ về dữ liệu và sản phẩm phân tích dữ liệu của bên thứ ba ngày càng nổi lên tại rất nhiều nước, trong đó có cả Việt Nam. Ngành dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu được coi là một công cụ chính thức để thúc đẩy sự phát triển và vận hành của nền kinh tế số và tài chính số. Như quý vị đã biết, chính phủ Việt Nam hiện đang thực hiện chủ trương và chính sách phát triển nền kinh tế số. Do vậy, sự phát triển tài chính số như là một hợp phần của nền kinh tế số là rất quan trọng. Ngân hàng Nhà nước Việt Nam cũng đã và đang nghiên cứu lộ trình chuyển đổi số trong ngành ngân hàng. Trong 2 năm qua, thì Thống đốc Ngân hàng Nhà nước Việt Nam đã phê duyệt các kế hoạch chuyển đổi số ngành ngân hàng đến năm 2025, định hướng đến năm 2030 theo quyết định 810 QĐ NHNN ngày 11 tháng 5 năm 2021 và kế hoạch chuyển đổi số của ngành Ngân hàng Nhà nước Việt Nam năm 2022 theo quyết định số 1097 QĐ NHNN ngày 28 tháng 6 năm 2022. Ban chỉ đạo chuyển đổi số của ngành ngân hàng thì đã được thành lập và sẽ tập trung chỉ đạo điều phối các đơn vị thuộc Ngân hàng Nhà nước Việt Nam và các tổ chức khác trong ngành ngân hàng đẩy mạnh chuyển đổi số, phát triển chính phủ số, kinh tế số và xã hội số trong ngành ngân hàng theo các kế hoạch đã đề ra. Để đem lại cho các quý vị có thêm những kinh nghiệm về phát triển ngành dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu trên thế giới, thì buổi hội thảo ngày hôm nay chúng tôi sẽ tập trung chia sẻ về mô hình các công ty hoạt động trong lĩnh vực phân tích và phân tích dữ liệu. Và vai trò của các công ty dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu trong nền kinh tế, rồi mô hình của các loại hình công ty này nhìn từ khía cạnh pháp lý. Và bên cạnh đó thì chúng tôi cũng sẽ chia sẻ một số những kinh nghiệm quốc tế về những cái vi phạm trong cái lĩnh vực về sử dụng dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu. Và buổi hội thảo của ngày hôm nay của chúng tôi thì cũng rất là vui mừng có sự hỗ trợ và đồng thuận của Calaba, là một trong những nhà tài trợ của hội thảo, và chúng tôi cũng rất là cảm ơn Calaba. Tham dự buổi hội thảo ngày hôm nay thì tôi xin được trân trọng giới thiệu từ phía Trung tâm Thông tin Tín dụng Việt Nam, Ngân hàng Nhà nước Việt Nam thì có ông Lê Anh Tuấn, Phó Tổng Giám đốc của Trung tâm Thông tin Tín dụng Việt Nam ạ. Từ phía Hiệp hội Ngân hàng Việt Nam, tôi xin được giới thiệu ông Nguyễn Hoàng Minh, là nguyên là Phó Giám đốc phụ trách của Ngân hàng Nhà nước tại Thành phố Hồ Chí Minh và hiện đang làm trưởng văn phòng đại diện của Hiệp hội Ngân hàng tại Thành phố Hồ Chí Minh. Từ phía bên IFC thì tôi xin được giới thiệu ông Dinh Trang Lai, Giám đốc nhóm cơ sở phát triển cơ sở hạ tầng khu vực châu Á và Thái Bình Dương của IFC. Và tại buổi hội thảo ngày hôm nay, chúng tôi cũng vinh dự được chào đón tất cả các diễn giả đến từ rất nhiều nơi khác nhau. Chúng tôi rất là vui mừng được đón giáo sư Xuân Thảo Nguyễn, là một giáo sư luật mang học hàm Benetton Miller, và đồng thời bà cũng đang là giám đốc của Trung tâm luật châu Á, là bà đang giảng dạy tại trường đại học Washington. Và chúng ta cũng rất là vui mừng được chào đón các diễn giả đến từ các công ty luật, đến từ công ty luật Indochine Council là ông Đặng Đức, ông Nguyễn Hữu Hiệu là của Fin Group, ông Mohammed Mudassar là của PwC, cũng như là ông Nguyễn Thiện Tâm là tổng giám đốc của True Money, và ông Việt là phó tổng giám đốc của tổng công ty dịch vụ số Viettel ạ. Rất là vui mừng được chào đón tất cả các quý vị diễn giả. Chúng tôi cũng rất là vui mừng được nhiệt liệt chào đón các cán bộ của Ngân hàng Nhà nước Việt Nam. Hiện nay các anh chị là đang join trực tuyến, và của các tổ chức chính phủ khác cũng có một số anh chị thì join trực tuyến và có một số thì ngồi tại đây. Và chúng tôi cũng xin được đón chào các cán bộ từ các tổ chức tín dụng ngân hàng, các tổ chức tín dụng phi ngân hàng, các công ty công nghệ tài chính, các công ty dữ liệu, phân tích dữ liệu, các trường đại học và các tổ chức nghiên cứu. Để bắt đầu chương trình thì tôi xin được trân trọng giới thiệu ông Nguyễn Hoàng Minh, nguyên là phó giám đốc phụ trách của Ngân hàng Nhà nước Việt Nam và hiện đang là trưởng văn phòng đại diện văn phòng Hiệp hội Ngân hàng Nhà nước tại thành phố Hồ Chí Minh. Sẽ có bài phát biểu khai mạc. Xin kính mời ông Nguyễn Hoàng Minh ạ.
Kính thưa anh Lê Anh Tuấn, Phó Tổng Giám đốc Trung tâm Thông tin Tín dụng Việt Nam, CIC. Kính thưa ông Vinh Chanh Lai, Giám đốc nhóm phát triển hạ tầng, nhóm phát triển cơ sở hạ tầng tài chính, bộ phận tư vấn các định chế tài chính AFC. Kính thưa tất cả quý vị đại biểu, ngành tài chính ngân hàng đang chuyển đổi số rất nhanh và được đánh giá là vượt trội, cũng như là thúc đẩy chuyển đổi số các ngành khác, góp phần quan trọng trong việc xây dựng kinh tế số. Thời gian qua, các ngân hàng thương mại đã ứng dụng mạnh mẽ eKYC, định danh khách hàng điện tử, AI, trí tuệ nhân tạo, dữ liệu lớn, Big Data, v.v. đã cho phép khách hàng mở tài khoản từ xa và không còn rào cản về địa lý phải đến các chi nhánh, các phòng giao dịch của các ngân hàng thương mại, các tổ chức tín dụng. Đặc biệt, dữ liệu được khai thác và ứng dụng mạnh mẽ trong chuyển đổi số ngành ngân hàng. Dữ liệu chính là nguồn tài nguyên có giá trị trong nền kinh tế số. Sự phát triển các công nghệ số cho phép thu thập dữ liệu từ rất nhiều nguồn khác nhau. Những luồng dữ liệu cùng với khả năng phân tích dữ liệu đã tạo ra nhiều giá trị trong hoạt động của cá nhân và của cộng đồng. Là một tổ chức cung ứng dịch vụ tài chính cho hầu hết các chủ thể trong nền kinh tế, ngành ngân hàng không thể đứng ngoài xu thế ứng dụng dữ liệu lớn giống như các doanh nghiệp bán lẻ khác. Đặc thù của hoạt động ngân hàng, cơ sở khách hàng rộng lớn, bao quát mọi mặt tài chính của nền kinh tế, v.v. đã cho phép mỗi ngân hàng xây dựng một cơ sở dữ liệu khổng lồ, từ dữ liệu có cấu trúc như lịch sử giao dịch, hồ sơ khách hàng, v.v. tới những dữ liệu phi cấu trúc như hoạt động của khách hàng trên các website, ứng dụng mobile banking hay trên các mạng xã hội, v.v. Việc phân tích dữ liệu hiện tại đã đơn giản hóa quá trình theo dõi và đánh giá khách hàng tín dụng của mỗi ngân hàng và các tổ chức tài chính. Dựa trên khối lượng lớn dữ liệu như thông tin, hồ sơ cá nhân và các thông tin bảo mật khác. Với sự giúp đỡ của Big Data, các ngân hàng có thể theo dõi hành vi của khách hàng, xác định các nguồn dữ liệu cần thiết để thu thập phục vụ cho việc đưa ra các giải pháp. Hiện nay, các nguồn dữ liệu của các ngân hàng sử dụng có thể đến từ bên trong của tổ chức, dữ liệu từ Internet và dữ liệu bên thứ ba cung cấp. Các ngân hàng cũng đã và đang thử nghiệm các kỹ thuật phân tích dữ liệu của chính ngân hàng mình, cũng như là dịch vụ của các công ty phân tích dữ liệu trong nhiều mối hoạt động như tìm kiếm khách hàng, cấp tín dụng, cung cấp sản phẩm, bán chéo, kiểm soát gian lận, v.v. Nhiều hình thức phân tích khác nhau đã được áp dụng, từ cách thức truyền thông cho tới những cách thức dựa trên thời gian thực, học máy hay các kỹ thuật tiên tiến khác cho nhiều mục đích đa dạng trong hoạt động ngân hàng. Xu hướng sử dụng dịch vụ của bên thứ ba không chỉ giúp tiết giảm chi phí mà quan trọng hơn, đây còn là một cách tiếp cận công nghệ hay kinh nghiệm chuyên sâu mà nhiều ngân hàng chưa có khả năng tự xây dựng hay là duy trì nội bộ. Tuy nhiên, trong chia sẻ dữ liệu với bên thứ ba, ngân hàng chúng ta cũng phải đối mặt với những rủi ro và mất an toàn dữ liệu. Kính thưa quý vị đại biểu, nhằm mục đích tạo cơ hội để cho các tổ chức hội viên cùng thảo luận với các bên liên quan về một, đó là thực trạng phát triển của thị trường dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu của Việt Nam chúng ta. Hai là những thay đổi về khuôn khổ pháp luật và các quy định cần có để phát triển ngành dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu. Thứ ba nữa là những khuyến nghị để phát triển hơn nữa ngành dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu có trách nhiệm và hiệu quả. Ngày hôm nay, Hiệp hội Ngân hàng Việt Nam phối hợp với Tổ chức Tài chính Quốc tế IFC tổ chức hội thảo với chủ đề phát triển ngành dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu tại Việt Nam. Chúng tôi mong rằng đại diện các tổ chức hội viên tham dự sẽ thu thập được nhiều thông tin bổ ích và có thể áp dụng vào thực tế quá trình công tác tại đơn vị của mình. Xin phép được thay mặt cho Hiệp hội Ngân hàng Việt Nam, chúng tôi xin chúc quý vị đại biểu sức khỏe và thành đạt, chúc hội thảo của chúng ta thành công tốt đẹp. Xin trân trọng cảm ơn.
Xin được trân trọng cảm ơn ông Nguyễn Hoàng Minh. Tiếp theo chương trình, tôi xin kính mời ông Dinh Trang Lai, Giám đốc nhóm cơ sở hạ tầng tài chính, bộ phận tư vấn các định chế tài chính của IFC ở khu vực châu Á và Thái Bình Dương sẽ lên sân khấu và có phần chia sẻ thay mặt IFC ạ. Xin mời ông Dinh Trang Lai.
Xin chào and good morning to everyone. So I would like to thank all the participants to attend this morning's session. So and thank you in particular, Mr. Min of VNBA and Mr. Twine of CIC. And we would also like to thank several other organizations which supported this event, including Indosin, PwC, and other partners. And most of all, we are highly grateful for Professor Winston Tao for coming all the way from US to support this event. And what is the background of today's activity? And I will explain a little bit. As you know that in Vietnam, we have already successfully completed 2 credit reporting projects in the past decade. And as a result, the credit reporting system in Vietnam is quite developed and is one of the more advanced countries in the region. The adult population that are covered by the credit reporting system, which has 2 credit bureau and actually 1 credit registry, CIC, and 1 private credit bureau. So the adult population cover in Vietnam now is more than 70%, which is higher than most other economies in the region. So, and this past cooperation has been quite successful, and we are very grateful for the support of CIC and the cooperation of SPV. Now, the question for us together is this. As the digital economy and digital finance develops, the situation has changed a little bit. What are we supposed to do? So that's our challenge. And digital economy has been a top priority for the government. There has been some national strategy issue on digital economy. And we hope to be able to support this digital economic development more from the data and data analytics angle. And a natural way to go beyond the credit reporting will imply 2 things. Number 1 is some new data infrastructure will be needed. And these in some countries include like the alternative data center for SMEs, going beyond credit bureau. And in some countries, they have a central consent manager. It means a central platform that the individuals could indicate your consent. And then such a consent can be shared across the APP, across the internet site, and things like that. And in some countries, there are common KYC platform. It essentially means that if your KYC is already done with 1 bank, and then that bank is already accredited, this KYC can be shared across to the other members in the system, so that not every bank or every financial institution need to repeat the same work. And so there are a number of things on the new data infrastructure. And then the second element for going beyond the credit reporting would be to help formalize and develop a new industry. And this new industry, we may call it a data and data analytics industry. So since analytics is an abbreviation for data analytics, so we will simply say data and analytics industry. And the players are actually already around in Vietnam, but not many. And I think less than 10 in total. And they are not yet well recognized. So how to formalize this industry, it will be a challenge for the next few years. And our idea is that we will initiate a new project with the authorities to help on these two things as the basis for digital finance and digital economy. So with that, I will conclude my opening remarks, and I thank you all, and I wish you a good discussion today.
Cảm ơn ông Dinh Trang Lai ạ. Tôi vừa được nhận được tin từ ban tổ chức là tham dự ngày hôm nay chúng ta còn có ông Nguyễn Đăng Hùng là phó tổng giám đốc của công ty thanh toán quốc gia Việt Nam NAPAS và cũng là chủ nhiệm câu lạc bộ fintech của trực thuộc Hiệp hội Ngân hàng cũng tham dự cùng chúng ta ngày hôm nay ạ. Xin chào đón ông Hùng ạ. Vâng ạ, thì chúng ta đã vừa đi qua hai cái phần phát biểu khai mạc của IFC cũng như là của Hiệp hội Ngân hàng. Thì để tiếp tục vào chương trình chính thức của ngày hôm nay thì tôi cũng xin được chia sẻ là buổi sáng thì chúng ta sẽ được nghe 3 cái phần trình bày. Một phần là của ông Dinh Trang Lai liên quan đến dẫn đề về dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu nói chung. Và một phần còn lại của buổi sáng thì chúng ta sẽ được nghe giáo sư Xuân Thảo Nguyễn sẽ chia sẻ về kinh nghiệm quốc tế liên quan đến mô hình của các công ty phân tích dữ liệu tại thế giới. Và sau đó thì chúng ta sẽ nghỉ ăn trưa tại khách sạn và ban tổ chức sẽ mời các quý vị chúng ta ăn trưa tại khách sạn. Và buổi chiều thì chúng ta sẽ đi sâu tập trung vào thảo luận 3 cái câu hỏi chính. Thứ nhất là thực trạng phát triển của thị trường dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu ở Việt Nam hiện nay đang ở đâu. Và thứ hai là những thay đổi về khuôn khổ pháp lý cần thiết để có thể phát triển được ngành dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu tại Việt Nam. Và câu hỏi thứ ba là chúng ta sẽ đưa ra các khuyến nghị cho các nhà quản lý cũng như là các thành viên trên thị trường để phát triển mạnh mẽ hơn nữa ngành dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu một cách hiệu quả và có trách nhiệm. Dạ vâng ạ. Thế thì bây giờ chúng ta sẽ đi vào cái chương trình chính thức của buổi hội thảo. Thì để bắt đầu chương trình chính thức thì tôi sẽ mời ông Dinh Trang Lai lên lại sân khấu và ông Dinh Trang Lai sẽ có một cái bài phát biểu liên quan đến dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu trong tài chính số. Xin kính mời ông Dinh Trang Lai ạ.
So, xin chào again. And I will not stand there because we are starting like a lecturing session. So I will just use this space. So again, our new terminology or new slogan is data and analytics market development. So in some countries, they may say that this is an industry called data broker industry. In some countries, you may say that this is a big data industry, but whatever it is. So we will formalize it as a data and analytics industry or data analytics market. And so what we are talking about. So I have some slides here, which I think will be distributed to you later. And I will talk a little bit in the morning, and then I will continue in the afternoon. So in the morning, let me just set the stage first before Professor Wing will come into more details with mostly US cases in mind. And so we know that, so and first, we know that there is a credit bureau and credit registry. And actually in some countries like US, they are specialized credit reporters. So they are normally not called credit bureau, and they specialize in certain industry like insurance, like car finance, automobile finance, or credit card, those kind of things. So the first and the second space together is normally called Credit Reporting Services Provider, CRSP. So these will need to strictly follow the credit reporting law and regulation. But credit reporting is normally a very, very serious thing. And it is a very, very high level of regulation and supervision. So the number of institutions in this space is very small. In Vietnam, basically only 2, right? plus perhaps a few the commercial information player, which you could say commercial reporting agency. But going beyond this space, there is a much larger space. It means many more players. So in the larger economy, we are talking about several thousand companies. In Vietnam, as I say, I think it's less than 10 now, but maybe a little bit more, which we don't know how many there are. So there's a large space here, which we will say data and analytics firms. Or sometimes people say these are big data service. Sometimes people say risk management service or whatever it is. So then for the developing countries, the challenge is they hear about the credit bureau, more or less with our help. They already have some laws, regulations, and regulators. These are already existing. But for this third space, there's basically nothing. There are a few players that are trying to do something around, but there is no clear rule. There's no framework for the third space to operate. But if you think about it, with the rising digital economy, Vietnam is probably around 10% now of the GDP is digital economy. In the higher market, better market, is already 40%, 40%. So, and with the rising of digital finance, and how much is digital finance now? In a better market, is more than 90%. It means more than 90% of the financial transactions are done online outside the branch, more than 90%. So then the question is, without data analytics, do you have digital finance? No. Do you have digital economy? No. So this is something a must, right? But can you rely only on 2 credit bureaus for the whole economy? No. So it is a must that this space must be developed. Otherwise, this is not consistent with the requirement of the economic development. So this is where we are coming from. But this is a new space, and I'm sure many people probably had not thought about it yet, So it will not be easy to get this space formalized and scale up. And so let's come back again. So let's remember that credit reporting is membership-based, and there is a data submission format, which is normally agreed by the members or approved by the regulator. And you look at your own credit report, how long it is. Normally around 4 pages, right, for the consumer report. For the commercial report is normally longer, but not too long, normally 7 pages, 8 pages, maybe 10 pages. So, and the data items on the data submission format is fixed with a definition. And that kind of document is normally called data dictionary. There's a data format, there's a data dictionary. So everything is fixed and normally approved. So for at least the last decade, there have been a lot of talk about alternative data. But when they say alternative data, they normally mean alternative data for credit reporting. And in the US, they normally say alternative credit data. So there is a word credit, alternative credit data. And that kind of alternative data is very, very small. Only a limited number of items. So I give you some examples which I did not create. So I just copy paste from one of the publications of a credit bureau. So you have like bank account movement, like your outstanding bank account figure, and then how much money goes out, how much money goes in, and this kind of thing. And then there are some small size loan. It's basically like alternative lenders information, which is traditionally not in the credit bureau, and in Vietnam is the same. So, Mr. Tuan, many people here say they want to join CIC, and I hope eventually they will be able to join. I know in principle they can join, but there is a process to go through. These are basically alternative lenders. So, and then the other types of payment information, these are basically utilities. So like mobile payment, and then there is a housing rental payment. So if you rent a house, did you properly pay your rent or not? Then on top of that, there is something from the public data space. Public data means non-confidential data held by government. These are like court judgments, and then the business registration, bankruptcy information. So there are a few items on the public information, which it goes to credit bureau also. But beyond that, then there is very little. So on a typical mission format for credit bureau, around 200 data items. But when you go into the big data space, what do you see? It's unlimited, right? The data items are unlimited. As long as it is legal, then you have all kinds of data. And in credit reporting, normally there are requirements for the quality of the data. So normally the data need to be, for the credit reporting, need to be relevant. It means relevant for credit decision and monitoring, need to be complete. It means if you have 10 loans, then you need to display 10 loans. Need to be accurate. That's very important. Otherwise, the data subjects will have trouble with you. And you need to be timely. It's timely reported by the members of the credit reporting system. And some of you are trying to be a member of the credit reporting system. So there are requirements for credit reporting data. But when you come to the space outside credit reporting, normally there is no such a requirement. If you say big data, what does it mean? They are mostly unstructured data, may not be very accurate, may not be very timely, may not be complete. So for the second space, we will simply say alternative data beyond credit reporting. So the word alternative data has two senses. One is a narrow sense, which means alternative credit data for the credit reporting system. The other one is a larger sense. It means any data outside the credit reporting system. So let's be careful what we are talking about. And today we are only talking about the second space, which we will say data and analytics market. Nowadays, if you go to a good market, you ask any of the larger lenders, like a bank, which I did over the past few months. I asked them how much data source you have outside credit bureau. Typically, people will say, oh, more than a dozen, and then say 10 to 20, something like that. So in general, I would say 10 to 20 data sources, third-party data sources. In Vietnam, how many? I also asked some people here. Normally, they say 2 or 3. So they still use other data sources outside CIC, outside PCB. It's already happening in Vietnam, but not a lot. So that's the situation. And there are research, there are surveys that I see in some developed markets. Normally 80% of the survey lending institutions say that they use multiple third-party sources outside credit reporting. And these are some of the examples. I'm not going to go through them one by one, because each one will need some explanation what it means, right? So like professional certification and qualification, these you know what it is. These are important if you say you lend to a dentist, a clinic or dentist, which is normally a private company, is a SME, if you will. And normally law firms actually borrow. Law firms like Intersin in some countries, they also borrow money. And the law firm is basically SME. So there are many professional services, and they sometimes also borrow. So this kind of qualification that is a useful information, but normally not in the credit bureau. And then there is something new, which I know is not in Vietnam, is a third-party KYC data. So you may think that KYC data, ID information must be from the government, but that's an old concept of probably half a century ago. So actually, private sector provides a third-party ID and KYC services. And of course, the credit bureau certainly do. They always do. CIC provides ID and KYC services, no issue. But other private sector company, they do. One of my clients before is called F-Row, F-Row. And if you go to their website, one of the main services they have is a eKYC service, pure private company. So these are also third-party data. And then digital footprint, obviously. So that depends on how you define digital footprint. It normally means what types of mobile phone you use, how often you use it, when do you log on the internet, when do you log off, and then what kinds of model of your device is, those kind of things. And then what kinds of email you use, and what kinds of internet service you use, those kind of things. And then the other thing is like, if you are MSME, you may sell products and services online. Then the user, consumers, or other user, they will have a review on your product. They may click a heart to say, I like, or I dislike, or you may have some ranking online or whatever. So those information are potentially also useful when you deal with MSMEs. And then e-commerce data, obviously, right? So, and then the other payment data, it means these are non-utility payment data. There are many of them. How do you on the e-commerce that indicates spend the part and what kinds of payment channels you use, and you may have a credit card, banking card, what kinds of record you have on the POS machine. And so there are data companies that are subsidiary of payments company, many of them around. These are also third-party data company. They specialize on payment data. And then nowadays the new thing, as we discussed with Mr. Hume last time, is their ESG information and ESG rating. So data company, they will collect those data. You don't have to do the rating. Other people do the rating. And nowadays, they also collect the carbon footprint. So carbon footprint can also be useful. And sometimes they get the government subsidy or carbon credit, which they can sell for money. Sometimes they are on the negative side, which may be closed down. So you don't have a borrower anymore. So then now the matter is, we know that if you alternative credit data in bureau, that's useful. For many years, on the articles or research that have proved that. So we don't need to discuss that. But what we need to discuss is, if we already have credit reporting data, why need non-credit reporting data? It means ordinary alternative data. Why do we need that? So indeed, there are research that has indicated that the credit reporting data plus non-credit reporting data actually will increase your predictiveness. In mathematics, it increases your power, right? So, and it's actually good for everyone. But as I say, we already know that in digital economy and digital finance is not only about the power of your solution or model, is about enabling the transactions. even a simple payment, you need some data behind because you still need to know the identity of the other side, right? So there is still some data being used. And if you're online, if you sell something, and sometimes you need to know who is the other party, whether the other party can really pay the money or not. So you still need something to enable the transaction. So it's not only about lending. And then this new market, it will require a different governance framework. And typically the regulatory regime, it will be much like credit reporting is, but the outside credit reporting, the data companies, they are not so heavily regulated. And so in conclusion, just for this morning's talk, then I will continue this afternoon. In conclusion is that if we want to develop digital economy and digital finance, we had to leverage the growing volume, velocity, and variety of data, which is to benefit both financial institutions and the consumers and MSMEs. So I think this kind of general principle, no one will be against it. So, but how to make it happen, hopefully we can work with you over the next few years to scale out this market and to formalize this market. So I will pause here and hand it back to.
Xin được cảm ơn ông Dinh Trang Lai ạ. Như vậy thì ông Dinh Trang Lai đưa ra một cái phần gọi là set the stage cho chúng ta để chúng ta có thể trao đổi tiếp trong suốt cả một ngày. Tiếp theo chương trình thì tôi xin được kính mời giáo sư Xuân Thảo Nguyễn, giáo sư mang luật mang học hàm Benetton Miller sẽ có cái bài trình bày của mình. Thì bà sẽ có bài trình bày từ bây giờ đến 10 giờ 15 ạ, và tập trung vào vai trò của dữ liệu và phân tích dữ liệu trong nền kinh tế. Xin mời giáo sư Xuân Thảo Nguyễn ạ.
Thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me here. Finally, after 3 days, I have overcome the jet lag. And so it's good to see all of your faces. So like Ms. Huyền said, that I'm going to focus on potentially give you an overall picture relating to consumer data and also relating to data companies and data analytics. And I myself is a law professor from the US. I began teaching related to e-commerce and also data protection law back in 2000. At that time, e-commerce will actually become quite robust. And so for the last 22 years, that's what's my focus. So may I have the PowerPoint slides, please? Go ahead. I just want to follow up with what Mr. Lai just said. If you look at some of the information today, even before the pandemic itself, you see that worldwide we saw more than 4,000 data companies. When we talk about data brokerage firms, these are strictly the kind of non-credit type of data. So we are focusing today, that's big portions of the graph of the triangles that Mr. Lai had before. And so with these, the enormous amounts of data out there and companies exclusively focusing on the brokerage of data itself. And so data, when we look at many countries, and so clearly then there's many different sources where data are collected. And so many people are afraid about the public information data, but public records contain enormous amounts of useful data. And so they've been collected. Where does it go from bankruptcy records? And so when you have SME companies or individuals in bankruptcy, those kind of information, of course, will be collected in addition to the regular kind of records that we have seen from court records. Of course, there's enormous amounts of cases every day. And so that's kind of information and data. They are very, very important for developing the so-called digital economies itself. And then motor vehicles, so all the numbers of vehicles out there, and they are enormous amounts of rich information. And so here's a listing of some of the public records, and also obviously the enormous amounts of non-public records available. And so we see every single day in e-commerce that the amount of data being generated. And so when we look at, obviously, that when we're talking about with all these data here, to have a robust economies like the US, for an example, and there's companies engaging in data analytics. And so let's have the same kind of definition in this particular rooms here. And so when we use the term data analytics, what we all means is that it's a process of examining raw data sets to identify trends, and then we can draw conclusions. And also we identify potential for improvements as well. And so we can see the data analytic is such incredibly powerful tools. And in order to have, to be able to engage in data and analytics, we have to engage in data science. And so many universities, of course, in the United States, when you go even from community college all the way to PhD programs, that we have a very robust data science major. And in fact, with data science majors nowadays, that young people, many of the students, young people, the job markets in data science are much more robust than, let's say, that in law. And in fact, some of the leading salaries in the United States right now is data scientists. And many days, so a young 22 years old graduates from university in the data science at this moment here, making more money than anybody else in any other field. And so you can see that where the trends have been and also where the trends going, that data science is incredible field and it's creating jobs. And so when I see your data, I see your jobs because it's related to the economies and the growth. And so therefore, with data science and data and analytics, and so how's data is used then? When I talk again, we are talking about the non-credit types of data itself. And so every single day, every company, I'm talking from a US perspective, every single company in the United States relies on data, of course, because why? To make decisions. Cannot make any decision today in a digital economy without data. And the decision cannot be credible if it's not based on data today. So it doesn't matter you're a small company, so medium-sized or large company in the United States, your decision have to be based on data itself for it to be credible. Otherwise, your partner is not going to listen to you if it doesn't have data behind us. So you can see. So obviously, marketing and advertising, that's normal. So that's understandable that you must rely on data to make that kind of decisions itself. And clearly, then you need data, make decision credible, and strategic decision, then you improve efficiency. So companies cannot function if they don't improve efficiencies, right? And you cannot improve efficiency, you don't have data. So that's why it's really important here. And so any company in the United States using data to improve efficiencies, improve in all facets of the economy itself. And obviously the roles of the non-credit data, that's what we use here. The data here is that predictive use. Predictive use is enormously important. So I give you an example. I'm a law professor at a law school. So what does a law school have to do with data? Without data, we will not be able to predict how many of our students going to be enrolling this year, what kind of majors are they going to have, and what kind of jobs for the law market itself, and also predicting how many professors we're going to employ, and also predicting the trend in the next 5 years, given that the pandemic is what the responses the lawyers will need. And so we need all the data, even at a law school, we need data to make our decision and make our prediction every single day itself. And so identify the trends and identifying what the needs will be. So every decision that we make, even in a law school, that we need data itself. And obviously in the for many companies, even companies not in a financial market, using data for fraud detection. Fraud detection even in a law school, because we use data, we know, is that somebody who's indeed in our ecosystem, or that person is essentially is somebody who's an imposter. And so using data for fraud predictions itself. and essentially relating to our own security and compliance. Because in a law school, even in an educational setting, there is security and compliance as well. So not only in the business sectors itself, right? So that's what we have. And then and here's another examples of how data and how data is used. And so when we have, obviously, when you talk about financial sectors itself, and so or even just in a company with finance team, and so the finance teams relies on data in making their own decision, and obviously that they can also understand what the key performance will be. So all these are self-explanatory, that the use of data by the finance teams every single day itself. And so, and obviously that be able to know that their revenues, be able to see whether there's any fraud, and be able to engage into predicting the behaviors of their own organizations here, and understand whether there's any kind of, for example, in this particular case, with their revenue projection, with their revenue turnover, and then making their decision relating to their service. So that's clear with the financial team. And so let's say the payment industry, and Mr. Lice already touched on this, so I will not go over them. But clearly, in the payments industry, we see the data is used, that Mr. Lice used the term risk, for example, engaging in risk and analytics, analyzing the risk, and also be able to segment your customer. And so in the payments industry, segmenting your customer is really important, so that you know exactly which group of customer that you want to target, and where do you need to go with your own models itself, right? And obviously again with the fraud detection, and also that be able to identify lifetime values of among your customers here. And so therefore you want to be able to understand, and that have that kind of life value prediction on your customers. And obviously that any kind of payments company, if you do not use your data, you will not be able to retain your customer, because you don't quite know that, because you don't know that your customer behaviors, and how can you be able to retain your customer? And also your customer might have new needs, but you don't have the data, then how can you retain them? And so predictive modeling separate one payments company from the others itself. And obviously that's with the data, you engage in customer data management here. And most importantly, of course, that you can also engage into algorithmic trading itself. And so let's look at healthcare. With the pandemic, healthcare is major issues in the front of the minds of many leaders. And the healthcare, when we talk about healthcare, that's both public healthcare system and private healthcare system. And we know that we need both. We need both public healthcare system and also the private healthcare system, which means we talk about insurance healthcare. And so in the insurance healthcare system, it's a huge market here. Data is driving the healthcare industry. And so the healthcare industry in any country today, without data, they would not be able to know where the resource coming from in order to build a new hospital. Well, using the payment, the insurance, healthcare receivable, use them as collateral, and then obtaining loans to be able to build new hospitals. And so the data is important in the financing for new healthcare centers, clinics, or hospitals. And so clearly the use of data in healthcare is enormously important, from the financing of hospitals care, and also equipment. When we talk about equipment leasing in healthcare, well, you need the data. Without that, you're not be able to engage in the financing of the equipment in the healthcare industries itself. And then obviously the most obvious ones of all, you need the data in the healthcare related research and deploying resources. And obviously the biopharmaceutical drug companies needs enormous amounts of their data to be able to understand and create new biomedical devices. And also the healthcare industry itself going more and more to service, not just the products. Today's mean the service as products. And so you can see that during the pandemic, there's a lot of movement to to the database healthcare services. And so which means that we will see many new healthcare related products online itself. Well, without data, they cannot do that. And so that's really important to think about outside the financial industry, in the healthcare, but even in the healthcare industry related to finance as well, right? And so education, that's a huge sector. Whether you're in Vietnam or you're in the United States or in any country, education is on the top of the mind of every single parent. You in this room here, each one of you is a parent and you care about your children's education. Education is huge. And so data, so you look at new companies in the United States, like there's a lot of new companies, and which sector is it in? The sector it's in right now is in the technology education sector. Where does that come from? Data. Because with the data, there's all these new apps, APP created related to helping the parents, helping the teachers to deliver better education, more customized education to their individual child. Because the idea is not every student is the same. And so every student is different. And so therefore using technology to be able to deliver specialized type of education and enhancing and leverage the learning itself. And so to do that, you need lots of data, enormous amounts of data in order to have a robust education system itself, and also strategically providing the kind of resources and also making sure that each child will be able to learn. And so it's huge. It's a huge industry. It's growing enormously with respect to the education is all data driven in that regard. So take a look at this picture right here. So this is an ecosystem that in an advanced country like the United States, you can see that in the data, you see the data is practically, of course, in everywhere. But if you take a look at it, how they are integrated. And so from each of the sectors and how it's integrated now. And then you have data companies, like I mentioned before, 4,000, data broker companies that collecting all different sources of data here, and how they then be able to engage in the data analytics that we explained before. And they hire a lot of people in data science major and do the work together. And you can see that in absolutely every major sector of the economy, that harmoniously the use of data is here driving it. So I will not go into details here because we only half day of discussion today. And so let's look at, this is one of the largest companies like in the data broker space. So Axioms here. So Axiom, if you look at all the data of a person that Axiom collects, and so we are talking about that this company is here. It's collect data and offers data to sell in 62 countries. 62 countries collecting data and 2.5 billion consumers out there. So it's just not 100 million, it's 2.5 billion. Okay, consumer out there that collects all the data here. And so you look carefully, you see that in fact, perhaps your data has been collected without you knowing it. And that is fine, okay? Because then many companies be able to use your data and to provide products and services that you use. And so whether that is your age, your gender, your education, well, the fundamental type of information itself, and then look at the purchasing behaviors. So I will not go over them, go over the whole pictures here, but for you to see that every facet of a person, that this company here is one of the leading global brokerage firms, and that they collect these data and they sell them, right? And then obviously you have Oracle. Oracle is one of the major large Fortune 500 companies worldwide. And you can see that Oracle itself, of course, that they very powerful, and Oracle is known as a third-party data broker, just like Axiom. And so what they do is that they have, of course, massive database here on the consumer data, consumer information. What they do, they integrate them into the full services here in the digital market platforms as well. But many companies turn to Oracle, just like they turn to many other third-party data for the kinds of information that they need to make their own decisions, as I went over earlier to solve. And so what you see then, in terms of asking ourselves, how did a developing nation like the United States created a robust third-party data ecosystem, the picture that I showed you earlier? Well, we need to have a legal framework that balance the need of the digital economies itself. And so for the US back in 1990s, when we have the e-commerce, and so in the middle of 1995, that's when e-commerce took off in the United States itself. And so back then, the United States would say, all right, we want a robust digital economy, but we also want to make sure we have a legal system, a legal framework to allow the robustness of e-commerce. Other countries, Europe, for example, took different approach. But the US believes that without the data, you cannot build the digital economies at all. We want an open system that allows third party collect data here and create new products. And that's why you see the United States enormously robust in this particular field, right? And then, so which means then, what's the question relating to law? What's the legal framework like? Unlike Europe, Europe has like one single framework system. The United States, we are known to be practical. Practical means what? We say that there cannot be one law for all because every sector is different. And if you have one body of law for data, then that doesn't work. We believe that we should have a sectoral approach, which means every sector is different. It has different needs. And so therefore, the legal framework involving data personal protection should be different itself. And so the United States sectoral approach. And so when I use the word sectoral approach here, I may have sectoral. So the sectoral approach is depending on the sectors and what the law is, right? With respect to data and data protections here. And so, but then when you go, so the US, because it's an older democracy, and so therefore there's certain concept relating to privacy, because when we're talking about data, we collect everybody's data, like we say, you know, and in every movement, every transaction in life, we collect the data, then third party collect data. But then the law itself in the United States, the concept of privacy. Well, all right, we embrace the concept of privacy. We trace it all the way back to the Constitution and also the ideas of what personal privacy. But we want to balance with the new economies, right? And so we understand that people sometimes want to be left alone. That's of their privacy. And also that some people might embrace the idea that, oh, you know, whatever information about me, I want to have some right in my information or natural right theories. And we understand that we cannot allow companies to encroach in the person, that there's certain kind of personal data that we don't want companies to have. But at the same time, that we want to make sure that every sector, whether in education, in healthcare sector, in finance sector, we want each of those sectors to grow robustly. Okay? And so we want a society in the United States, of course, everything done online. Okay? So I'll give you an example. Last year, around October of last year, I bought a house in Seattle, Washington. And Seattle, Washington housing market is very expensive. And so a small house in Seattle is 1.3 million USD. The entire transaction from A to Z was done online. And so just think, and I did not even know what my banker looked like. I did not even know my agents look like. I did not see any human being. The entire transaction, okay? The entire transaction to solve for the $1.3 million loan, that's a lot of money, right? And the entire transaction, everything done online. Well, how so? Because the law allows that. The legal frameworks allow that, allow the collections, a lot of data about B in order for the digital economy, for the whole, for the seamlessly, smooth transaction of a $1.3 million loans that I did not even see any person, everything done online on my cell phone, right? And so therefore, in terms of the sectoral approach here, and so when we look at the sectoral approach, we're making sure that every sector, there's certain kind of sensitive information that we will protect. But otherwise, if they're not sensitive information, companies, third party, go ahead and collect the data here. And there's some guideline and framework that you need to follow. It's important to have law and guidelines in order for a robust digital economy to grow when we talk about data itself. All right. And so now, so again, with the US sectoral approach here, that's obviously is that on the one hand, third-party companies collect data. On the other hand, we want to make sure that the consumer themselves have rights, that they have the right to court, okay? Because we want to balance the two. And so therefore, that in the US, because it's a complicated country, I understand that, but at least we say there are certain rights that the individual themselves have, and the rights clearly stated. And so, for an example, every website, whether you hotel or you the bank or a university, there's a website, every website. And every website has a terms of use. Well, what is a terms of use? Well, the term of use is a contract. Is a contract between the student, between the consumer, between the patient, between the insured, And so every website, there's interaction between the companies and the user. And so which means lots of data will be collected. And the term of use is a contract. And so therefore, we have robust contract law governing the terms of use or terms of service. Right? In addition to data privacy law. And so what I'm trying to say, the legal framework, when you think about data, you don't just think about data protections alone. You also think that the data protection law interact with the contract law. Because term of use and term of service, when you talk about digital economy, everything done online, which means that term of use and term of service, they are contracts. So therefore, I have to have a robust contract law in addition to the data protection laws itself or the cyber security laws itself. And so, and then obviously then when you have, let me go, in the interest of time, let me go faster, okay? So when we talk about personal data, in the US, we are very careful when we talk about that phrase, that particular phrase, because if we're not careful, then we say everything is personal data. That's not true. Okay? There's only that the kind of identifiable, personal, identifiable information. That's the kind of information that receive special kind of protection. All right? When many third parties out there that in data brokerage firms, they themselves, they making sure that the data is anonymized. So they can turn the identifiable data into anonymized data. And so which means then when they strip the identifiable personal data to anonymized data, and then they're not subject to the sectorial law. So this is important because I don't know what the legal framework in Vietnam is like. But what I'm saying here is that third-party brokerage firms, they themselves, many of them will take the personal identifiable data, the so-called super sensitive data, and they strip away the identifiable portion and they have anonymized data. So why? Because they don't want to be subject to the strict law governing the personal identified data. That's called PII up there. Okay. And so, which means in a country like the United States, that the data companies, they have chief data officer, And so pretty much every companies in the United States, even the small companies, they themselves also have chief data officer, or they farm out the work to somebody to make sure that they comply with the data laws itself. But again, and again, the reason why Axiom or Oracle has enormous amount of data is that they themselves making sure that they strip away a lot of the personal identifiable components and make it anonymized data here, right? And so which means then specific laws will govern, let's say health, related to healthcare data law, and then we will govern the personal identifiable data involving patients, right? So that's a separate body of law. But if you remove the personal identified information of the patient, then you have anonymized one and you can use them, right? All right, so here we go. And with the laws itself, laws don't mean anything if you don't have enforcement. And so in the United States, with the data protection law involving the personal identifiable information in different sectors, and then we have the federal government, the FTC, and so this the enforcer, and so the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and so there's a specific law that provides the FTC with the authority to bring action, to investigate and bring actions against companies that violate the data protection law, and also engage in misleading practices. And so I will show you some of the cases later on. So then you will see that, so we understand we need to have digital economy. We have specific law that making sure to balance both the business need and also the individual privacy right. But we need an enforcement mechanisms as well. So here I'm looking at the enforcement mechanism is the FTC, and the kind of cases that the FTC have brought against Uber, against Google's, you name it, against hotels, against dating websites. And so FTC have its own jurisdiction and bring cases, right? And then we learn from those cases what to not, and making sure to avoid those kind of problems. So, and then in addition, with the Federal Trade Commission, and then of course, just like in Vietnam, like you have provincial government. In the US, we have 50 different states. And so the local governments also empowered to bring action. Now, this is important. This is important here because third party collect enormous amount of data. Oreo, you talk about Axiom, we have such a robust data system in the United States. We do not allow individuals to bring actions against a company, because if we do that, then everybody will bring actions against companies, and that will cause a lot of problems. That will hinder the digital economy, will hinder the data science work, that will hinder data and analytics. And so individuals in the United States, for example, if they say that, this company harmed me because they took my personal data, well, that person will not be able to bring the individual lawsuits against the company, because we don't want to open the floodgate. It will cost too much. And so what we have instead in the United States, that you can complain to the Attorney General of your state. You can complain to the FTC, and then the FTC will conduct investigation and bring cases on your behalf. So this is another important aspect of it, okay? That the federal government and the state government will bring action on behalf of the consumer when there's data breach, when the data so-called injuries, right? There are some cases out there that in the US allow class action. So group of people are allowed to bring together, but that will be very difficult, right? And so these are the issues to keep in mind. Why am I sharing you with this? I mean, I'm sharing you this information right now for you and then the lawmaker to envision what will be your approach. What will be your approach to data? What kind of law and regulation and what kind of principle that you're going to develop, whether that you're going to allow sectors to flourish, from education, healthcare, finance to flourish. Okay, that's how are you truly going to embrace the so-called digital economies itself. Okay, so what approach you go to use here? And that's essentially that you create a society that where people enjoy the kind of product and services that you provide. But at the same time, that they know the certain rights that they themselves have. And then what kind of approach that Vietnam going to create here? So I think I'm going to maybe I go through this particular slide. Okay. So let's give an example, right? Because I mentioned the sectoral approach. And so the sectoral approach itself, the FTC, the one that have the authority to bring action. And so that's specifically the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission Act, the specific law for that. And I go over cases. And then the Financial Services Modernization Act. This is the law that we passed, you know, at the beginning of e-commerce back in the 90s. Think of many countries back in the 1990s, what your country was doing, what other countries outside the United States was doing in the 1990s. So the United States, because it's among the first economies that embrace the so-called digital economies here. So the financial market so important, right? And so therefore we passed the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act that allowed the financial institution to share data, and I feel to share data because enormous amounts of very important data here. So we have that particular law in the 1990s itself. And then of course, that's law also relating to credit. And then we have the health insurance, HIPAA. Remember I talked about the robust healthcare industry. Okay, we talk about $1 trillion industries or data driven. And so for data driven, which means we need to collect lots of data. And so therefore we have the specific law in the healthcare industry governing data and data collections itself, but also allow the robustness of that industry. So we have HIPAA, the Healthcare Insurance Portability Act here. And then of course we have a law relating to security breach notification. So that is the law that when there's any breach, then the company must notify their members immediately. And so if I have an Amazon account, and if it's a breach on Amazon, I must be notified immediately by Amazon. And then if I have an account with Microsoft or any company, if there's a breach, immediately that notification. If not, the company will be fined. Okay, and so therefore we have relating to security breach notification aspect of it, for example. And of course, Mr. Lice already talked about the Fair Credit Reporting Act. I will not talk about that. And then the other one, Fair Information Act, relating to personal identifiable information. I talk about that. And then children. You know, nowadays, every young kid, as early as 5 or 8 years old, parents give them a cell phone. And so back then, in the 1990s, the United States, we anticipated that where the country will be going. You know, we anticipate the country will be going to a kind of economy that everybody will be online. And so back in 1990, so we passed a law to protect children. And so, but at the same time, we know that the data from children is also important data as well. And so therefore, there's specific law governing the collection of data from children when they use a particular website itself. And so we have the Children Online Privacy Act, okay? And then FERPA is law specifically relating to students, whether you're in elementary school, high school, college, you know, and then university and colleges, school collect enormous amounts of data about every single student, right? And so therefore we have specific law relating to that. But at the same time, the university might want to provide and share some of those information, let's say to a credit card companies. And so many universities in the United States, they team up with a credit card company and they issue credit cards. Harvard, Yale, they have their own so-called Harvard credit card. Well, in order to do that, they have to share certain information with credit card companies, but they need to do in such a way that will be in compliance with the federal law itself. And so you can see that you can see this is what I call sectoral approach itself, right? With that. And of course, that we have also that in the 1990s, when people in the United States start to have many cell phones, and then many marketing companies keep sending you messages. And so when you open your phone, you have all these advertisements. In the United States, we have laws that do not allow third-party data to target you and send you spam email, send messages to your cell phone. So we have specific law back in the 1990s, law that's essentially that you want to be left alone. You don't want people to bother you, right? And so therefore we have those kind of laws as well. And so no marketing, no email marketing, and no phone calls targeting you. Okay, so we have like no call list. So the no call list and also the Spam Act itself relating to that. So with that, I'm going to stop and then I will come back in a few minutes. Okay.
Xin được cảm ơn giáo sư Xuân Hồng Nguyễn ạ. Như vậy thì sáng nay chúng ta đi qua hai cái phần trình bày của anh Dinh Trang và phần trình bày đầu tiên của giáo sư rồi. Thì bây giờ cũng là 10 rưỡi ạ. Không 10 giờ 20. Xin mời quý vị chúng ta sẽ nghỉ giải lao 10 phút nhỉ. Đến 10 giờ 30 thì chúng ta sẽ quay trở lại vào đây và chúng ta sẽ tiếp tục nghe phần trình bày của giáo sư Xuân Hồng Nguyễn ạ. Xin mời quý vị chúng ta ổn định chỗ ngồi ạ để chúng ta tiếp tục cái phần trình bày của giáo sư Xuân Hồng Nguyễn ạ. Xin mời giáo sư Xuân Thảo.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much for returning. I know it's always difficult after having a wonderful break, seeing your colleagues and having some tea and coffee. It's always so difficult to return to the auditoriums here. So what I'd like to share in a few minutes, first of all, to share with you some of the cases. And so you can see what it's like in a robust economy, that some of the action that the government has brought against different companies for violating data. And so then we can draw some of the lessons to learn here. And so let's look at the first one itself. So this is the FTC Federal Trade Commission brought actions against taxpayer. And the name taxpayer, when you read, if you understand English, you see that taxpayer, slayer, you cut, destroy someone, right? So taxpayer is a company that's working with individuals in tax preparation. And so every year, imagine people have to file tax returns. And when they submit the tax return to the federal authority or to the state authority for the tax authority, and what happens here is that the company taxpayers here, they did not safeguard the information of their customers, because they collect a lot of data from their customers, and yet they did not safeguard them. So what happened? Hacker break in, and the hacker took the information. Then the hacker pretended to be the taxpayer, the individuals, and then they pay, and then they file fraudulent tax returns. Of course, in this particular case, then the FTC brought an action against taxpayer for not safeguarding the personal information, because tax information, important tax information, is relating to the financial industries itself, and the federal law governing tax information is in the financial related information. And so therefore the law in this particular case, the federal law, is the Graham-Bliley Act, the one relating to the law governing banks, financial institutions, and tax institutions. And in this particular case here, that's this company. Well, what happens then with this company is that when the FTC investigates, and then they found in this, you violate the Graham-Bliley Act, the Financial Modernizations Act here. And the companies were subject to 10 years. 10 years of they have to be audited every single, and then they have to be assessed by third party, which means will cost the companies lots of money now. And because they have to hire a third party out there to audit them and then submit the biannual report. And furthermore, that they promise they're not going to be in violation of the laws itself. Typically, when the government investigates, not only will cost the companies money, but also reputation. Okay? Because when we're talking about online economy, social media, and so everything can go viral very quickly. So negative attention is not good for the companies. So what we talk about here is not only the litigation, but the negative reputation and the viral natures of the social media itself. So let's take a look at the next case. So for those of you who travel abroad, and sometimes you see Wyndham Hotel. And so the Wyndham Hotel is a large chain hotel, and the hotel is, you know, between 4 to 5-star hotel. And Wyndham worldwide owns, you know, talk about thousands of hotels. And so hotels, of course, that collect lots of data because if you check into the hotel, when any one of us go to a hotel and the hotel have the information relating to how long you stay at the hotel and what kind of food you ate at the hotels itself and how you spend your money and also where you coming from, and lots of information about each person stay at a hotel in addition to the payment information as well. And so enormous amounts of information that hotel collecting them. Why data is so important for hotel? Because then they be able to predict whether that they should expand to new location, what kind of services they should provide, and what type of services are good or not good. And so hotels live on data. They need data. And so Wyndham worldwide collects enormous amounts of data from their customers who stay at the hotels, right? And so in this particular case here, that's what happened, that there was a data security breach in this particular case. And obviously that when you look at fraudulent charges, because a lot of the personal identifiable information when there's data breach, and then they essentially, the hackers then use a lot of these valuable information here and committed a lot of fraudulent activities. And so the FTC, when they filed the complaints against the Wyndham Worldwide Hotel, and what they look at, what's interesting, look at is a privacy policy. So every website has a privacy policy. And so a website in Vietnam has privacy policy. The lawyers draft them. Well, here's a problem. And so privacy policy statement, like we say, you know, it is a contract, but also it must follow law. And so United States have law specifically, like as I mentioned before, relating to privacy. And so the privacy policy statement posted on the website, that's essentially that the hotel, you know, they have to safeguard the information and they have to make sure the information is accurate, all of that. Well, the FTC investigation revealed that the hotel violated their own privacy policy. So you cannot put a privacy policy on your website and yet you don't practice it. You'll be in deep trouble, right? And so in the US, not only hotels have privacy policy, Microsoft have privacy policy. So every company in the United States now, you know, like I mentioned before, particularly large companies, medium and large companies, they have privacy officer. And so in this particular case here, that they violated their privacy policy. So under the law, when you misrepresent your privacy policy and you don't follow your privacy policy, then you violate the law, and the FTC can bring actions against you for doing that, for violating that, right? And so if you say on your website that you safeguard all the data, but it turned out you did not safeguard information, you did not encrypt, you did not use encryption to encrypt the data. You just store the information on some server that's no encryption, that's major problem. Okay, so you have to follow what best practices with respect to security, cybersecurity out there, but you don't follow it, then you expose yourself to violation of your privacy policies. And so the FTC went after them there. So it was so this particular case, it was a big case. And next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this particular case, it went to court, okay? And then you have the courts in this case here, that there's a lot of orders against the hotel chain. And of course, that among the orders here that you see, that the court order that they have to have an annual security audit, that costs a lot of money. Because you don't do a good job, now you have to submit to the court an annual audit. Imagine that how many years that they have to do that, to submit it to the court, and how many lawyers they have to hire, right, to do the work itself. And then you can see that in the audit requirement, the courts require? Well, obviously the court is not just the court, the United States, the governments work together with the court to come up with exactly what the orders will be. And that's the companies, the hotel, they must certify, they have to have audits to certify. For example, you see right there, they have to certify that the compliance that they must engage in, and they have to engage, and then they're making sure that they have the formal risk assessment and the compliance relating to that, but it has to be a third party, which means what? The court and the FTC did not trust the hotel anymore. Okay, they say they have to go to a third party. And so the third party to audit, they have to be somebody who have expertise in privacy, right? And also that also have a savvy team to audit, especially relating to data, and in order to produce a report that the courts require. Next slide, please. And so then you can see that in this particular situation itself, that I cannot read it well. So you can see that what's interesting here, the settlements have to be in compliance for 20 years. So this court orders that will be in place for 20 years. Well, that's a long time. It's not for 1 year, 20 years. I mean, it's almost as though you have 20 years prison term. This is your 20 years. You're a hotel and you have a court order for 20 years. This is what you have to do. This is just hotel. Okay. So you can see that in a vibrant economy like the United States, even hotels have to know privacy law and making sure that every privacy policy statement they are indeed in compliance thereof. Next case, please. Next case. Ashley Madison is a global dating website. We're all so busy, cannot see and meet each other face to face, dating online. That's the norm, right? That's the norm. So I talked to my niece and my nephews. Every single one of my niece and my nephews in their 20s, all their dating occur online. There's no more human being. It's like, wow. So the young people, well, at least in the United States, all the dating takes place begin online. So therefore, dating website. So this particular website here, Ashley Madison, is a global dating website, and it has website, and its website has members in 46 countries. 46 countries using this website for their online dating. Okay, so there's 30 million users in many different jurisdictions. And so this particular case involved multiple governments, not only US government, but the Canadian government, the Australian governments, because it's cross borders. And so data nowadays is, of course, data doesn't stay in one space. There's no such thing, right? Data is global. And so this particular website here, and now there's problems relating to their securities, their data securities here, and they violate their privacy policies as well. And so the FTC in the United States worked with the Canadian Authority Privacy Commission and also the Australian Privacy Commissions here. And the United States, of course, in this particular case, took the leading role in enforcing in investigation and also enforcing. They took the leading role in the investigation here and also lead to the proposed settlements here. And so, and these companies operate in 46 countries, and yet, and you look at it, it has no written information security policy, because they think that, oh, we doing dating, well, nobody gonna know, government so busy focusing on the financial sectors, nobody gonna pay attention to us. So therefore, they did not even have a formal information security policy, which means, for example, if you have a website the website that you say that, oh, you target US audience, if you violate US law, the FTC will work. We'll make sure that if you violate US users, privacy, for example, then the FTC will bring actions. It doesn't matter that you're not so-called in the United States itself, right? So you can see here that governments in many countries work together, particularly when the problem is so egregious, like in this particular case here. And then this companies with enormous amounts of data relating to dating. Well, dating, you know, age, occupation, income, preferences, you know, lots of intimate details about the person, you know, and so all those information right there. But yes, the companies here, that they themselves, you know, they themselves did not have any reasonable type of security. They did not train their employees with respect to safeguarding the personal information, right? And so they did not even. And also what's interesting at this company, they use many third-party providers. They use other data companies as well. They use many third-party providers. And then they did not even check whether those third-party providers, you know, data providers themselves that implement any kind of security measures at all, right? And so therefore, in this particular case, then the FTC did a lot of investigation and brought actions there. So next slide, please. Right. And so what we see in this particular case, then, of course, that, you know, because affect many people in the dating, this particular dating website here, and the actions itself that was brought. And what's interesting in this case here that $1.6 million was the fine. You know, that's not cheap, right? So the fine in this case, 1.6 million USD that the company must pay to the federal government, to the FTC for the violations here. But that is just with the FTC United States. And then on top of that, the compliance, the audit that they have to be subjected to the courts or to the FTC itself. So it's quite costly then to actually Madison for collecting a lot of data, but yes, in violation of that. Next case, please. So here we have Uber. So Uber, you know, is huge, right? Billions of companies here. Uber is a platform. Uber is a technology company. Yes, it is ride sharing. That is true. So we know, everybody know Uber, and the FTC brought action against Uber because why? Well, because here we have Uber, how Uber store the sensitive information. Every time when you pull out the phone and you want to, let's say you want to go from here to District 2, and then, you know, the information that you have on Uber, and in this situation, then how did Uber store the information? A company like Uber is so vast and so wealthy, but when they store the information in the clouds, right? But there was complaints from consumers that many of the personal identifiable data, so all the payments information and also that information that be able to pinpoint to the persons, right? Because Uber has a lot of that. And so in this situation, then the FTC alleged that Uber misled the consumers, right? How so? Because on Uber website, on Uber's app, there's a privacy policy statement. And Uber violates the privacy policy statement. On the terms of use, Uber violates the term of use, term of service. Uber violates the term of service. So that's why I say that the term of service or the terms of use on the app or on the website or the privacy policy statements, that those are the very important statements that you put forth to the public. But if you violate them, right? Because you violate, you say that you're going to safeguard it, and the laws require that you have to safeguard it, okay? And yet you did not safeguard, or you did not seek consent. In this situation here, you are collecting more than what you say, okay? And also that if you also use beyond what you're saying, okay? So whatever you put forth in your terms of services or privacy policy, you must adhere to them. And when you don't adhere to them, you're violating that. So the FTC brought actions against Uber. Okay. And of course, FTC brought actions against Google. And so the FTC in the United States is very, very active because we have specific laws that empower the FTC to go after any website when any website in the United States, doesn't matter what company you're in, fintech, hotel, transportation, any companies. If your privacy policy and your term of service, if you violate them with respect to personal identifiable information, FTC will investigate and bring actions against you. So that's what we have, right? And that's important because we want to trust all those companies. We want to have a robust economy. And so therefore, we like all those companies. I love Uber. I cannot function without Uber. Right? I don't even own a car. I don't like to drive. I love Uber. But I don't want Uber to violate my privacy. Right? And so I don't want Uber to mislead me. Whatever Uber is saying, okay, fine, don't mislead me. I cannot bring the action against Uber because I don't have the resources. It will cost me lots of money to bring action against Uber as an individual. FTC bring the actions on behalf of all the consumer. So therefore, the system works very well. So Uber, and then FTC brought an action against Lenovo. Right? So Lenovo is a big company, global company. And if you know the history in terms of Lenovo, so Lenovo, for example, years ago, they bought out a division of IBM ThinkPad, you know, back a long time ago, IBM in the personal computers, and Lenovo bought that ThinkPad personal the computer sectors of IBM. And if you look at Lenovo computers, and you obviously will see some of the ThinkPad brand names itself. And so, and Lenovo is, you know, the parent companies, you know, founded in China. We all know that's here, right? But when you function in the United States, you are US companies here, then you have to make sure you follow like US law. So in this situation here, that's there was a major problems, okay, with Lenovo because Lenovo sells laptops in the United States. But when you sell laptop in the United States, you install software in all those laptops. And in this situation here, when Lenovo install this software in the laptops here, that this laptop compromise the consumer security, okay? And also Lenovo, when they install those software in the laptop, Lenovo collect consumer data without the consent from the consumer. So when you pre-install your software in a device, and so Apple, for example, if Apple sell you iPhones, and which means that Apple pre-install lots of software, so lots of software in the iPhone, but and Apple must make sure that they receive consent, you know, when they collect information data, and all those apps in the Apple ecosystem itself, also making sure that they have to in compliance with the privacy policy and also with respect to the security and accuracy of the data itself. So Lenovo in this situation here, when they pre-installed the software, they did not receive consent from the consumer, and yet Lenovo was collecting the data. I mean, you cannot do that. So in this particular situation, that Lenovo is selling laptop all over the United States. And so the federal government, FTC, and 32 other attorney generals, that means 32 states, and the federal government that brought actions here after lots of investigation and brought actions against Lenovo's here. And obviously that Lenovo then have to be in compliance, and then they settle the litigation with the FTC itself. Next slide, please. So you can see that so far what I have shared with you, that it's really clear that law don't mean anything unless there's enforcement mechanism, and enforcement mechanism is healthy. healthy because everybody know exactly what do you need to do. So with the data, when we're talking about moving forward to a digital economy, everybody needs to know what exactly my role, what I cannot do, and so then everybody can be able to develop in a really fast pace, right? And so therefore, in this particular case here, that things works really well here because all companies know what to do, what not to do. So as a result, in the US, that's practically every big university now in the US, in addition to data science major, we also train many students to become privacy officer, data privacy officer. So that's the new economy itself with that. And then in law school, many law schools, in fact, the majority of law schools across the United States, that we train all our law students in data privacy law. Because why? Because every company in the United States, in addition to chief financial officer, now there is a position for chief data officer or chief information officer. So that's it. So this have become the norms, the norms here. Because why? It's better to be in compliance than be subject to litigations itself, right? So therefore, we want to, so in compliance then, which means that making sure the way in which the company collect data using them and that's not in violation of their privacy policies, right? Because the FTC have the authority to bring actions against them. And then also they have to, all the companies, whether you Microsoft or whether you are fintech companies here, you have system to essentially engage in audits procedures. So exactly then, essentially, when we talk about data privacy, what do we really mean by that? So let's just break it down, break it down for a second here. As I mentioned to you, the US sectoral approach, but what it really means is it's really simple. It's simple, but it's complex at the same time, right? So here are some of the key principles here. Okay? When we talk about privacy law, right? So all companies, United States, all the data privacy people know when we talk about privacy. And so what it means that when you look at it from the perspective of the data subject, okay, the data subjects here. So what are the rights the data subjects have? So turn it around. And so what companies must do, whether you in data brokerage firms or whether you in any companies, hotels or you in dating website, doesn't matter. And so making sure that number one, that is the principle related to inform. Okay? Whether you're in the financial sector, healthcare sector, whatever sector that you're in, okay? Whether you're in a game companies, there's a lot of online games, right? So first of all is that you have to inform. So the first one is inform. And so you must inform, okay? Inform your data subjects about what you're doing, about your privacy policies, about what exactly you're doing, you're collecting the information, what you're doing. And so you have to inform. So inform is the number one. So first one, inform. So that everybody, all your data subjects know exactly what are you doing with the data that you're collecting from them, right? So whether you Oracle, you Axiom, or you any companies out there, they all follow this principle, inform. And then consent, which means that you're going to receive agreements from the data subject. So Mr. Lai mentioned earlier that in the financial sector, you can have one bank that's essentially representing a numbers of banks to collect consent. And so therefore, that one consent can be applicable to all. So I'll give you an example. Back to the example when I bought my house last year. And so when I bought my house last year, I gave one consent to Wells Fargo Bank. One consent to Wells Fargo Bank. But I know, because I'm in the industry, so I know that Wells Fargo have businesses with many other banks in the United States. And I also know the moment that I signed my loan for the house that I bought $1.3 million, the moment that I sign on that loan, the loan will be sold to another bank. Literally, the moment I sign on the loan, remember everything done online, I told you, right? So I click on electronic signing of the loan, and I know that that loan will be sold second later to another bank. Well, that's other bank. They don't need to receive, they don't need to get consent from me, because Wells Fargo probably already collected consent. Okay? And so that's exactly what Mr. Lai was saying earlier related to consent, and how in the financial sector, identify who represent whom and who's work with whom, then you can receive one consent. Okay, so let's say that. And so now Wells Fargo, they sold the loan, they sold my loan to another bank. I had no idea who that bank was or is. And Wells Fargo collects monthly payments from me, okay, and give that money to the other bank. So I give one consent, and along the way, a lot of data about me have been collected. Pretty much everything about my life. I mean, Wells Fargo and the banks knows more about me than my son knows more about me. Right? So you can see that, but consent's important. You know, consent's important. So then I know that I know as a data subject that, well, I consent to the privacy policy, to the data policies that Wells Fargo have. And also because when I bought the house, obviously related to credit, so there's special disclosures, you know, yes, and I get to read them, you know, so consent there. And so consent is very important. Uber get into trouble because they did not get the appropriate consent. A lot of companies, when they get into trouble, they did not get appropriate consent. They get some consent, but they collect more than that, or they use more than that. They go beyond the scope. Okay, so then they violate their policy statements, right? And so consent's important. And also, privacy policy also means that you have to look at you the expert or the professional. You have to revise and look at your privacy policy and updating them. Because why? Because the nature of the business, the relationship changes. We live in a very dynamic, economy itself. And so that the nature of the business or the relationship with other businesses changes. And so therefore, sometimes you have to go back to the data subject and ask for new consent. Just because you ask for first original consent, that might not be enough. You might ask for new consent when you expand in your business here. You might have asked for new consent here. And I think that sometimes that businesses either too lazy, or sometimes they say, oh, you know, we ask for new consent, and then, you know, we are attracting new attention to that. But you have to ask for new consent or, you know, or update consents, right? If not, you might be in violations of your own policies itself. And so the consent aspect of it is important to do that. And then we have notice. And so what's exactly notice here? And that's, well, when you're talking about privacy policies here, and that you need to making sure when you change your privacy policies, then you need to make sure that you send notice. Okay, you send notice. And then if there's breach of the data, you need to send, well, that's the notification. But no notice involving that when you change your privacy policy, you have to have notice. And notice also relating to, and it's in somewhat related to inform, that it has to be conspicuous. You know, you cannot give the notice in very, very, very small print. It has to be conspicuous. Same with the inform concept as well. Right? And notification is relating to breach. So when there is a breach, then there have to be immediate notification. Why this is important here? Because the sooner you send the notification, you are telling the public you are taking the issue seriously. And so therefore it's good to give notice right away. It's just like when you tell your children, if they did something bad, that they should tell you right away. No, you always tell your children do that. And then if they don't tell you right away, you get mad at them because they're not telling you right away. Sometimes the problem is small, but not telling the public, it becomes a bigger problem. So notification is very important here. That's when there's a breach, immediately notify the members, notify the users here, and let them know immediately. And also when, at least in the US, the sooner you notify, it's also that you build better relationship, and also you reduce the harm as well. And so that's important here. And then obviously, in addition to the notifications principles here, there's requirement relating to having the data protected, right? And so when companies put on their website that they say they safeguard the information, that they protect their data, but yet they don't protect the data, that they don't use encryption for personal identifiable data, for example, and they allow hackers to be able to hack and use them, right? And so in that type of situation, then when you violate your privacy policy, and you violate your terms of service, and also you violate this particular principles here, that you must have the personal data protected. Now, keep in mind, if you are third party, that your data is anonymized data. If the data is anonymized, then you're not subject to this. Yeah, that some of you will say that, I collect anonymized data. It's not personally identifiable data at all. And so in that kind of situation, you're not subject to this particular law. Okay. And so which means then I will show you one of the cases that anonymized data, that's true. It's not subject to the law. When I use the term personal data, I'm talking about personal identifiable data. All right. There's a lot of other personal data about me, but they might not be identifiable data. If they are anonymized data, they not be subject to these principles. Okay. And so now, and then another one is deceptive practices against the deceptive practices. And so essentially that all of the terms of use, term of service, and privacy policy statement, making sure that you don't mislead the public. If you mislead the public, if you say ABC, but then what you do in practice is EFG, you violate that. That means you misleading the public. Therefore, it's called deceptive practices. And the FTC has, as you've seen, enormous amounts of powers, right, to do the investigation. As you saw, actions against Uber, actions against Ashley Madison, all of that. And so cannot have privacy policy statement without falling through. And that's very important right there. So here, I think in the interest of, let me see. So here just a few examples that I will not go into these details here. A few examples of cases where companies directly violate those principles that I just explained in the prior slide. And so, for example, here FTC versus Turn Inc. And these companies here deceive the consumer by falsely leading them to believe that the company do not essentially, they say that they reduce how much they tracking the consumer, but it turned out they track much more. So therefore they misleading the consumer. And so therefore the FTC brought actions against them, okay? So let's say FTC versus GigYaks. So these companies here, they mislead the consumer on the website. They say they collect information for X, Y, and Z purposes. It turned out for some other purposes, it's ABC. And so therefore the FTC brought actions against them for misleading the consumer this way. And let's say that FTC versus Practice Fusion in this case here, well, it's an interesting case. And so this particular website, right, they essentially, it's a data brokers firm that they have anyone out there in the United States to post reviews of doctors. So you go and see a doctor today, and then you decide to post a review of your doctors, right? And so then for people get on that website and they post a review, they saw a doctor, Dr. ABC, they did not like that doctor or what have you. So they post those reviews. And this particular companies here, so they collect these data relating to reviews of doctors. And what they did is that they essentially mislead the consumer with respect to their, when they collect all the data relating to those reviews. And when they ask the consumer, and then because the consumers here provide information, and there's some sensitive information about these consumers, particularly that relating to their personal information and their medical information as well. And so therefore, in this case here, the FTC brought actions against these companies here, right? And then let's say the last case, interesting here. So FTC versus InMobi. And so these companies here, of course, they tracking where the consumers located. And so you go on an app, and then many apps ask you that, can we track your location? Can we know your location? And then nowadays that you can touch on that, yes, you go ahead and track me wherever I use your particular app, or you can only track me for this transaction, no other transaction at all. And so these companies, what happened is that they tracking their consumer with the cell phone, but then they did not inform the consumer, did not receive consent from the consumer, and yet they track the consumers here. I mean, for what purpose? Geo-targeted marketing, right? But they did not inform and consent. So you cannot track without informing consent, right? So that you will be in violation of the law itself. So you can see that with the FTC's actions here, right? So can I have the next slide, please? Next slide, please. So here, just another examples here. FTC versus Vulcan here. It's a games company. And so this game is, so it's a very popular games. But then the problem is that if you're going to have the games installed on all those cell phones here, but then that's when you do so, but you did not receive consent because games companies, they collect enormous data. But again, if you want to collect data, you need to inform consent. You have to follow informed consent, notice with a breach and notification and information, personal identifiable information. You have to safeguard them. That's what you have to do. And yet they did not do in this particular case. And so here's a fun case: FTC versus Patch, right? These companies here send emails relating to weight loss. Everybody want to look good, so therefore this is a weight loss case. Well, in this situation here, they did not safeguard the information, and also when you cannot in the US bombard people with emails, right? Because we have specific law prohibit that, and so they violated that here. The one's interesting is that FTC, for example, when there's a lot of APP developers, and so let me pause here for a second, because in the US. We don't mind that you collect data. You just need to inform, consent, notice, notification. You have to follow that, right? But then when you design, if you design APP, so we are training APP developers nowadays that when you design APP, you need to think about privacy. So we say that privacy by design. Okay, that's the concept. So if you are creating in bioengineering, and you create new biomedical devices, and biomedical devices now they collect lots of data. And so inside the body, but collect lots of data, right? We say that, when you designing new biomedical devices, then you need to think about privacy. You need to be in compliance because you collect lots of data now. And so then you create any kind of apps, any APP, you need to know the law relating to privacy. And so in this situation here, there was 12 APP developers, and they themselves, of course, that they install these software, these APPs, they have their products installed on cell phones. And it turned out that, well, in this particular case here, this APP decided to monitor the consumer TV usage. And so when people watch TV, And the APP monitors how you use, how long you watch a particular channel, what show you watching, and what day you watching, what time you watching, right? And then in these situations here, that the consumer had no idea that they've been monitored in their own home when they watch the TV. And yet there was no notice, there was no informed, there was no consent, right? And so to do that, it's to essentially monitoring the behavior of consumers, and yet without informed and receiving consent, you're violating the laws, right? And so in this case here, the FTC, for example, essentially send the warning letters that, making sure anybody designing APP, if you're going to monitor, you're going to collect information, you monitor behavior, you better have informed, you gotta have consent, you gotta have notice, okay? And so all that you have to follow. So let's go next to the data aggregators, processor, and controls for a second. So here, I'm going to switch gears for a second. I'm going to talk more related to the roles and obligation of data processors and data controllers, okay? So that's what I'm going to talk about here. Right. So obviously that when you are the data processors and you also data controllers here, the FTCs have something we call behavioral advertising principles. And this is, this has been around for a long time. It's not something new. In fact, everything I tell you has been around the United States for a long time. Okay, and so notifications is one of the requirements, right? And so the FTC specifically is have this set of principles here. And so what do we mean by all these? And so the FTC listen to experts in the industry, and then over time create guidelines, and then or create principles, and then everybody then follow them, right? So we have here behavioral advertising principle, because a lot of the information data aggregate that they process information and control data relating to behaviors. So therefore, in this situation here, that the this kind of principle specifically providing ways in which for companies that in the industries of data processing and or in the industry data controlling be able to follow itself. So in the interest of time, I like to fast forward. Let's fast forward here. And so fast forward here for a second. So let's go to some of the principles for a second. Okay. So let's go to the notification. So remember in my earlier slides that I tell you all different type of law in the United States, and so which means that if a company is in the US that involved in data processing, then they have to follow all those sectoral laws and approaches, okay? And which means depend on which industry you're in. So if you're a data processor in the healthcare industry, then you follow the data privacy in the healthcare industry. If you're data processor in the financial industry, then you follow the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. So we are sectoral with respect to that. By having sectoral approach, it's reduced cost because what industries law and best practices is not the same for other industries at all. So that's why the professionals need to know that the sectors they're in, and then they make sure that they process the data when they're in that particular industry and follow the exact laws itself, right? And so then fast forward, okay? What's interesting, fast forward to the next slide, please. The next slide with Vermont, the one with Vermont. So Vermont itself. So go to the next slide. Okay. So what's interesting is that one particular state in the US that have specific law to regulate data broker, because before 2018, no other states in the United States that have specific law to regulate data broker. Because as long as the data broker, just like in any sector, that you follow the sectoral regulation, or you follow best practices, or you follow the FTC principle, you'll be fine. But then some of the states were more concerned about the role data broker. And so therefore, for example, Vermont decided to be the first state in the US, for example, to have specific law to regulate the data broker themselves. And so here, let's take a look at that, right? So if you are a data broker in the state of Vermont, then that means you're in the business of collecting data here, and you brokers the data and sell them to others. So that's what you do. And in that situation here, then obviously that the law requires that the data brokers, you need to disclose your practices. So that means inform, back to inform. You need to disclose your practices relating to the collection of the data, storage of the data, that you sell the consumer data to other party. And so that is about inform. And then obviously then when there's breach, then you obviously must engage in notification. And obviously then in this context here, in terms of consent, that you must allow, if some consumer don't want the data to be collected, then they can opt out. And so when you obtain the consent, some don't want to give you consent, that they have the right to opt out. So you have that portion here. And then obviously relating to safeguarding the data, when your data brokerage firm, then you have to employ whatever the industry practice at that moment with respect to security, then you have to adopt them. So then you make sure that you have this data security in place, right? And so you can see that clearly the law is really clear that this is a robust industry. And so here is the specific law for it. That's what we have here. And then also that, and also that there's this prohibition as well, that if the data brokerage firm, they cannot engage in acts, like they cannot engage in using the information to engage in stalking, because they have a lot of information. They cannot engage in stalking, harassing the individuals here or the data subject. Of course, they cannot engage in discrimination behaviors, or identity theft. So you see a specific law governing data brokers in that. So let's go to the next slides after that. Okay, next slide for that here. So I'm going to share with you some FTC cases against data brokers. And so of course, like we, in the United States, we have thousands of data brokers firms, right? And so there's some, and then when they violate the law, and let's see, FTC brought actions against them. And so, for example, FTC brought an action against InfoTrack Information Services. It's a data brokerage firm. And so these companies here, they did not provide notices to the consumer. Okay, and so when you violate one of those principles, one of those laws, if you don't inform, you don't consent, you don't obtain consent, and then you don't provide notice, and you don't provide notification, when you violate that. And so this particular data brokerage firm, this is a data brokerage firm. That's all they do. They collect data and they sell data, right? And they fail to provide, when there's a breach, they fail to provide notice to the consumers. And so in that situation, then what's interesting about this information is that this company, they collect data, they collect lots of data relating to employment. And so in the US, employers, when the employers they buy lots of data from third party. And so when the employer, they're going to interview a prospective candidate or an applicant. So, and then if even before they give an offer, they think that they like this person. And so they're going to buy third party data about this potential new hire. Employers do that. So employers now, they use a lot of data before they engage in hiring new employees. And so, and then also landlord. landlords before they have a tenant, before they allow a renters to move into their apartment or condo. Landlords are big corporation, right? So they also buy lots of third-party data relating to the applicants. And so one apartment, you might have 10 applicants who want to rent the condo or the apartments here. So the landlord relies on third-party data to analyze whether that they're going to accept among the 10 applicants, which applicants will be the next tenants. And so that's what we have in this particular case. InfoTrack Information Services, they are third-party data, and they sell data to landlords and to prospective employers. So labor industry and then housing industry. So quite big here. And in this situation then, it is really important that the data brokerage firm provide accurate information. Because you collect data, third party, you collect data and you sell your data. And if the data is not accurate, then the employer who interviewed me will not give me a job because you provide the wrong information to them about me. And I will not be able to get my job because you, third-party data broker, provide wrong information to this employer. And that's no good. We want robust data, but it has to be accurate data, particularly relating to people's life, employment. That's important. That's job, housing. You know, I want to rent that apartment, and yet you, the third-party brokerage firm, you provide wrong data about me. I have no idea that you provide wrong data about me to the landlords at all, right? Because we know that everything's about every individual in the United States. There's an enormous amount of data out there collected about a person. That is fine, but information has to be accurate. And that's important. So data brokerage firm, whatever data you collect, you must have accurate data here. If not, in this case here, the FTC brought actions against InfoTrack Information Services. Why? Because some of the people found out, they went for job interviews and they did not get a job, and they learned later on that the third party provide wrong information about them. And some of the renters, they did not get the apartment. It turned out that third party data brokerage firm provide wrong information about them. And so that's why they did not get the apartment, right? And so that's what we have here. And so in this case here, they have to pay a hefty fine of $1 million here to settle the case with the FTC. So let's say look at next companies itself. So next company, so FTC versus Lib Lab. Okay. So here in this particular case, of course, it's easier to understand because it's involving loan applications. And so when we're talking about loans, we are talking about lots of payday loans or online lending, because they're very robust in the United States on online lendings, and in many other countries, online lendings, right? And so which means that loan applications and loan applications. And so when you have a data brokerage firm that collects lots of data relating to loan applicants here, and of course that they collect those loan applicants data, and then they sold the data to marketers, right? And then it turned out that those marketers then turn around to hack on the individual client's account. So in this particular case, then the fine is much larger, $4 million fine, because they did not, the company did not follow through with what they promised, with what they're doing. Particularly, they sell the information to third party, and and what exactly the company, the marketer who bought the data, what are they doing? They're making sure that they must safeguard the loan applicants' information, and yet they did not. And also they did not receive the consent of using the data, beyond the scope. And so the consent were violated, the informed portion were violated. And so you can see that's why the FTC went after the data brokers in this particular case, right? And so what this means is that when you are a data broker, you collect data and you sell to another party. you have to make sure under US system that the buyers of your data here, that they themselves must engage in the kinds of that they have to be in compliance with the law itself with respect to the consumer, particularly personal identifiable or financial data. So that's what we see in this particular case here. And so, and even if the data broker say, oh, it's not my fault, it's that the purchase of the data, they the one that violate the law. No, you violate the law too. All right. So we're not gonna let you get away with it. Right. So data brokers here. So let's look at and so let's actually skip that. Let's go to the next case, please. This is an interesting case that I like to stop right here. So this particular case is really well known, right? Because this case is the only case that went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. All right, and the facts, this case is an interesting case here for data brokerage firms, because we're talking about data brokerage, data analytics here. So this company, Spokio is a data aggregator. It's big, and so aggregate lots of data here, right? And particularly aggregate data from all the social media websites. So we have many social media websites from, we're talking about Instagram, Facebook, there's so many social media websites. So they aggregate them, whether picture, media, but all those data, they aggregate all of them, right? And they aggregate not only from social media, but also from public sources, all different public sources. So they are a huge data aggregator. And what's interesting in this case that the data that they aggregate, they are anonymized data. They are anonymized data. However, Spokio has the analytic tool that piece together all these anonymized data into identifiable personal data, which means they use anonymized data here and they put it together, okay? And they know that, aha, look at this data here, the profile is this person, Mr. Jin Chan Lai. Even though the data that they collected does not say the name of Jin Chan Lai, does not say anything about Jin Chan Lai, the person identifiable to a person at all, but they use the analytical tools that to piece all these anonymized data together and be able to say, aha, this data here is Mr. Jin Chan Lai. This data over here is Ms. Huyền itself. So you can see that data brokerage firm has become very sophisticated, right? And so they collect anonymized data, but they have the tool to piece together the profile of an identifiable person. And so in that situation then, and so of course that in this particular case, right, the consumer say that, well, the individual, the anonymized data that you don't have to inform me, you don't have to receive consent from me, but just a second here, the fact that your tool be able to pinpoint back to me, but yet you did not inform me, you did not receive consent from me, okay? And so therefore, a group of consumers brought a class action. So class action, I know that there's no class action in Vietnam, but class action, they brought a class action against Spokio. And against Spokio because they say that it turned out that when Spokio used piecing the anonymized data together here and then profile and then say that's in Mr. Lai. But it turned out that the profiling of Mr. Lai contained inaccurate information. Okay, and so now imagine I purchased data from Spokio, and Spokio said, oh yeah, these anonymized data pinpoint to Mr. Lai, and it turned out contain incorrect information. But I bought those data, and then I target Mr. Lai for marketing or for whatever it is, right? And of course, Mr. Lai said, just in here, he was never informed by Spokio or never give consent to Spokio at all. And so in that situation then, right, in that situation here, In fact, in this case, it was, in this particular case, was employment applicants. So this gentleman, he went on a job interview, and he's very well qualified, and yet he did not get the job offer or call back. And he said, just a second here, something going on. And so it turned out that the information about him, okay, that the employer purchased from Spokio about him was inaccurate. But the information employer purchased from Spokio got them from various sources, social media, from the, from Mr. Lai's social media. But the information was anonymized. This is really important here, because anonymized data, supposedly they don't have to get Mr. Lai's consent, right? But they get all these anonymized data, but then they use the analytical tools, right? And then to pinpoint back to Mr. Lai, but the information about Mr. Lai is inaccurate. And so in this particular case, then the action was brought, all the way to the Supreme Court. And then the whole question turned on, can Mr. Lai, in a class action lawsuit, bring in actions against the data broker firm, the data aggregator, and who aggregates these anonymized data out there. And so this particular case, the court say that yes, Mr. Lai has the right to bring the action with other people who suffer the same ways, right? To suffer the same kind of harm, so they can bring a class action against Spokio in this particular case. So I'm going to stop here. But in summary, that essentially with data brokerage firms, that the key principles of privacy that have to follow is informed consent, notice, notifications, and safeguarding the data. Okay, follow whatever that at that time the security measures of the industry, you must follow it. Okay, so those are the really keys here. And of course, that when they're breached, you have to engage in notifications. When you revise in data policy, then you have to give notice. But the keys here is that you get an informed consent. And so therefore, in the end, we want to have a very robust data industry itself. And just there are some avoidable problems. And what I present to you, that in an economy like the United States, that we learn from these problems and we avoid them, and they are avoidable. And so that's why systematic approach, that university, we educate students, we train privacy officers, and then companies in the United States, every company from Microsoft to hotels, any companies, they themselves have privacy officers in their company. And then we also have a system making sure, because we everything online, all transaction online, we need enormous amount of data, but we follow the informed consent, notice, notification, and safeguarding the data itself. And in the end, it's a very vibrant data industry. And of course, data, we say data is oil. The difference between oil and data, oil, we run out of oil soon, but data, we will never run out of them. Okay, and so that's the best part about data itself. Data is a new currency, but you're not going to run out of the new currency. You know how to use them well, use them strategically. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn over to Ms. Huệ.
Cảm ơn giáo sư Xuân Thảo Nguyễn ạ. Như vậy thì chúng ta thấy rằng là một bức tranh khá là tổng thể rồi, đúng không ạ? Từ cái câu chuyện là khuôn khổ pháp lý phải như thế nào, rồi là data chia sẻ ra sao, bảo vệ dữ liệu như thế nào, rồi là tính giá trị của dữ liệu trong mọi cái hoạt động về kinh tế số rồi tài chính số. Bây giờ thì chúng tôi sẽ mở ra độ khoảng 10 phút cho các câu hỏi ạ. Thì không biết anh chị có bất kỳ một câu hỏi nào rất là really burning question, thì tức là một câu hỏi thật sự là cần phải hỏi ngay lúc này, thì chúng ta sẽ dành cho giáo sư Xuân Thảo Nguyễn và ông Dinh Trang Lai. Còn nếu như trong trường hợp mà chúng ta chưa thấy có câu hỏi nào thực sự là cần phải hỏi thì chúng ta có thể để dành cho buổi chiều. Bởi vì buổi chiều chúng ta sẽ có 4 tiếng vừa thảo luận vừa trình bày. Xin mời ạ. Xin mời các anh các chị ở tại phòng họp này và các anh các chị trực tuyến ạ. Các anh các chị trực tuyến nếu có câu hỏi thì có thể giơ tay, ban tổ chức sẽ bật mic hoặc là các anh các chị có thể cho câu hỏi vào trong hộp chat ạ. Các anh các chị có câu hỏi giơ tay giúp ạ. Đây ạ, xin mời ạ.
Thank you for the very interesting presentation from Miss Professor Thảo. And I have a question for you that you raised many interesting cases about legal trouble that the third party and or data broker has faced when they are selling or using the data getting for the data subject owner. But I have question that is there any cases the company or the bank who use data from the data broker has trouble with legal with the legal, or they have bad reputation from that?
So the question relating to, do we have any cases specifically relating to banks and get trouble in banks? And so not a specific case that's brought to court relating to that, because banks in the United States are very careful, right? It's banks in the US banks are heavily regulated industry, and banks in the United States are typically that they I don't want to use the word pioneers, but they have to, and so they safeguard the financial data quite well, and they have chief financial officers, and they have the legal teams, and they also have the technical, the technologists as well. And also what they also have is a computer response team. So if when they identify some problem, immediately there's a computer response team to fix the problems as well. And so therefore I cannot say that there's one particular case involving a bank for violating the data. What we have instead, that we have cases where credit scoring company, that's where we hear the problems. It's a credit scoring company like Experian. That was big data breach, but not major cases involving banks. And so I say I commend the bank for doing a really good job relating to that. And so that's. But if I find any cases involving specifically with data breach in that, I will let you know. And also because the modernization law, the Grambly-Bliley Act, the GLB, it was passed in the 1990s, and which means that the banks for a long time been in the practice of sharing data. So the banks, compared to other industry, the banking industry share enormous of data to each other, to partners, all that. So therefore they have better practice as well, better legal teams and also technologies teams to prevent problems. So I think that compared to other industries that you heard, all the cases that I talk about, they are not in the banking industry because the regulation involved in bank have been much longer than any other industries. When I talk, hotel, who will ever imagine hotels get into problems, right? Or dating website, because those are newer type of problem online. So that's why.
Thank you so much.
Just to add one more point, that normally when we talk about the US case, we have to be careful what we are talking about. So in US, FCRA, actually Consumer Reporting Agency, its concept is larger than the credit bureau that we have in mind. So please remember that. That's only special to US. And the last two cases that Professor mentioned, that actually the HR, the Human Resources Data Company. So then they are ruled to be as a CRA, Credit Reporting Agency. But let's say in any other country, Vietnam or Cambodia, this would not be considered a credit reporting agency. This would not be considered to be under the credit reporting law or regulation. So, but the US concept is a little bit larger. So we have to be careful what's the difference behind. So, but in financial services, actually, if you use inaccurate data, not complete data to do something, just to understand the borrower more or to understand the client more, normally it should be okay. And actually, it is being done on a daily basis. But if you affect the people, like they cannot get a job, then that's too serious. Or they cannot rent an apartment, they have to live on the street, then that's too serious.
Cảm ơn ông Dinh Trang đã bổ sung thêm thông tin ạ. Xin mời một câu hỏi cuối cùng cho buổi sáng ngày hôm nay ạ. Xin mời ạ.
So if no more questions, I think let's finish the two questions I had in mind, just for people to know. Number one, you say that in the US, the individuals cannot bring a data company or any other data intensive company to the court, but only the state attorney general or maybe FTC can do it. Which law say that the individual cannot do it? And then but Federal Reserve, OCC can also do it. They are financial regulators.
Okay, so thank you for the question, Mr. Lai. So the individuals cannot bring actions with respect to data policy or data consumer protection or data privacy law. Which law saying that? Pretty much that you can see different sectorial law will say that. And because why? There's so many consumers. We don't want each consumer, and anytime they think there's something wrong and they run to the court, cannot do that, right? And also litigation costs money as well. So cannot do that. It's not effective. But we know that when there's harm, when there is harm, then it affects thousands of the consumer. So therefore, the government bring cases. Now the FTC bring the action. Mr. Lai asked a question. Well, if it's relating to the financial sector, does the FTC bring the action, or the Federal Reserve bring the action, or the banking authority bring the action? In the United States, only the FTC. The FTC works on behalf of other federal government agency. So the FTC on behalf of the financial sector industry, on behalf of the let's say that's relating to the federal healthcare industry, okay? And so the FTC has the authority working with different federal agencies to bring the action. And that makes sense because we cannot allow different agencies to bring the action. Right? We need to have one enforcement mechanism itself, but it has to work well. So the FTC in coordination with, let's say, the Federal Reserve Bank, and then investigating a particular financial sectors, to do that work. But then the authority of enforcement itself is the FTC, because we have specific law to allow the FTC to do exactly that. And so that's answer your question. And also by doing that, we want to reduce costs. We want to reduce the problem, reduce costs. I don't want to cause more problems for any sectors as well. So reducing the cost efficiency is important. So that's why we have it this way.
So, okay, let's remember that's the US situation.
Yeah.
From the history is a legacy. So probably out of date. So I know you don't want to hear that. But in the new laws, normally in other countries, individuals can indeed bring case to the court.
In the US, we allow the class action. Okay. Here is where I disagree with countries that allow individual to bring action, because the individual, they don't have the money to bring an action. And so to have something in the law, but it makes no sense, don't have it. Other countries, European countries say, oh yeah, we allow individual action, but they meaningless if they don't have access to lawyer and bring the case. Why give people, why recognize such a right when there's no means to do so? That's just useless. That's useless law. So that's what I would say, Mr. Lai.
Okay, they driven further to that. Actually, the law will normally say that it will the proof of wrong will have to be reversed. It means okay, Mr. Tuan runs a company, and actually CIC can be sued, right? So it's very normal. So if I bring a case against the CIC, it's not me who had to prove that he has done something wrong. No, the law normally says that CIC had to prove that he did not do anything wrong. So the burden is on the company, not on individual. So that's the principle. So I mean, in the new laws, in the new countries, so which is outside US. Yes, not in US. So and these are the new framework in other countries. US has a very old framework, which is like a legacy. So let's remember that in Vietnam, I don't think Vietnam will follow that model in the US. It will follow the new model. That's what I guess. So, but it does not depend on me. That's what I guess.
Vietnam follow the law that will work. Follow the laws that works. Instead, the law just looks pretty on paper. And that's not doing anything good, but it doesn't work. I mean, I have been doing this for 22 years, and I see what works, what's not working. I don't defend that everything works in the United States, but I also know that what works and what's not working. And I think that's really important for any country adopting any kind of regulation or framework or best practices, is that what approach will be best for companies, and also what approach is best for the individuals as well. And also what Mr. Life talked about, the burden of proof. The burden of proof that with the US approach, I will not use the term legacy approach, because the FTC is a very robust enforcement company and has enormous amounts of authority and power. You can see that it go after Uber, it go after Lenovo, it go after Google, and so enormous amounts of investigation. And when you empower an individual to bring the lawsuit, the individuals and the lawyer does not have the kind of resources to go after a company, even though if you put the burden on the company to say, oh, that company have to show that they did not violate the law. How many companies out there will say, yes, we violate the law? You hear him saying? How many companies out there, when you bring an actions against them, and they say, oh, yes, we violate the law? All companies will say that we didn't violate the law. And so to say that the burdens on the company to show that they don't violate the law, of course they will say they don't violate the law. You follow? Hey, I'm a law professor. Okay.
Yes, in developing country, you will not even find a regulator. Okay, so it's at least for the next 20, 30 years, not realistic. And there have been many cases actually where individual brought the case in the court, and then there will be wonderful lawyers who will do it on their behalf just to educate them.
Right. So the concept in the United States called class action. And that's something missing in China, missing in many countries, and missing in Vietnam as well. Vietnam does not allow class action. Class action is a very powerful tool that allows the consumer to bring action, which means that a class, which means that people who suffer the same harm. Okay, and so 100 people, 1,000 people, 1 million people, individually, each person does not have the resources, the money to do so, but together, collectively, as a class, they bring the action. That's a very powerful tool. China does not allow it. They're so afraid to have class action, right? Vietnam, hopefully Vietnam will allow it. And so same with Europe. And so whether that the individual actions here, a class action, then they can pool the kind of resources, and then the group of lawyers will be able to represent the class. The class itself can be hundreds, can be millions of people, so in a class together. And so together in that way, then you can truly bring the action, because it requires a lot of investigations as well. Every time we talk about data violation, like a lot of investigation involved in that. So it's a class action, not so that is something is very robust in the United States. And so just to want to clarify, we allow so-called individual action, but we allow class action because that works well. Class action. So
okay. So when I say the lawyer's help is not a class action, it's a public benefit lawsuit. So for example, Mr. Duke of Indonesia, he can make himself famous once the regulation is out. You can bring the first case in Vietnam as a public benefit case. It could be a small case to educate the society. So I know another public benefit case is like this. You go to a theme park, like safari or amusement park, and they take your face. They take your face as entry requirement. So the lawyers, student, it could be law student, will bring a case to the court saying that, okay, why do you need to take my face just to enter your park? I paid the ticket. If you take my face, why do you store it? They're obviously not reasonable, right? And you become a public case, make yourself famous. Okay, so you can walk. So, but before the lunch, I need to sort out another situation, which is also, again, is an education for the participant. So you say anonymized data is not subject to the personal data protection law. Okay. Now, I know you had the older one. Under the new law in the new countries, is normally any personal data is protected. But PII is sensitive data. It means you need extra protection. So first, any data protected, personal data protected. But if PII, you need extra protection. So this is the structure. So anonymized data may be better, but you will still need to be protected. Why? Is as your case say that there are always smart IT people, smart IT solutions that can make anonymized data as like the real data. So, but in US, which law says that anonymized data does not need to be protected?
And so, because we have, so you see the FTC provide principles, and then we also have the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and so that bureau is also issue guidelines as well. So they are guidelines, Mr. Lai. So we have the FTC guidelines, and we have the Consumer Financial Information Protection Bureau has its own guidelines. So those guidelines that essentially specifically tell companies who engage in advertising, online advertisement. And so therefore, when they collect in any kind of data, they need to follow those principles that I mentioned before. And so inform, consent, and then notice, notification, and safeguarding them. So that's what we have. And then the PII, then the specific law relating to specific federal law for certain kind of PII, then we have those separate law. And so guidelines and principles, industry regulated, that's what we have for the anonymized data, right? And then we have the PII in parallel with specific federal laws itself. And then we have at the state level, the Vermont state level. So Washington State, California State, New York State, in subsequent years, they also have law. California now is a leading state, has much stricter law as well. And so that's what the specific state provide. And then you saw the data brokers law in Vermont that require the data brokers, when you collect any data, this is what here's the law in Vermont you have to follow. And so states are now having, in the United States, the individual state themselves are having stricter law than the federal laws itself. So that's where the trends, where we're moving in the United States.
So you are saying that the new state law, like Vermont or California, they include the anonymized data under the protection, or no?
They don't divide it up. They say
Okay, so they don't distinguish anonymized or not anonymized. Okay. So okay, that's clear. So then it's in line with the new trend in the new countries. So So let me just close off the first case about public benefit. So the judges ruled that number one, the SIM part had to apologize to the public. Number two is they had to stop the practice. So that's basically the result. Because the judge does not want to rule the market, right? Judges still want to make the market function. So this is the first case. So yes, the SIM part the SIM part was asked to prove why they need it, right? If you cannot prove that you need it, then you cannot do it. So why do you need to collect my face? Why do you need to store my face just to enter your SIM part? Maybe collect it may be okay for security reason, but you cannot store. So that's the end result. So is it still a mindset of how to promote it?
So facial recognition is a very sensitive area. Okay. So for example, the state Washington, when Amazon tried to collect a lot of facial recognition information, Microsoft also want to be in this particular space as well, right? And so state laws quite strict when it comes down to facial recognitions, because facial recognitions, I mean, we are talking about very sensitive personal data here. So therefore, it's subject to higher, stricter scrutiny. So in the US at this moment, many companies, they themselves, if they engage in the facial recognition data collection and they're doing that, there's a lot of public uproar. There's a lot of public debate, and companies have to be very careful. And so some companies, in fact, stop engaging in facial recognition data as well. If we talk about big company, Microsoft come out with a statement, Amazon come out with a statement relating to facial recognition technologies itself. So in the US is, yes, my little disagreement with Mr. Lai is that there's out there in the data space that people think the United States, oh, legacy country, oh, law. No, we constantly engaging in refining the law. And also we understand that every state is different as well, because every country is different. And then depending on the economies of that particular state. In Washington State, in Seattle, because we are Silicon Valley of the Northwest, we are very technologically savvy, versus in another state, it's agricultural business. And so therefore, certain data privacy in Washington State not applicable for the farmers. And so why you make the farmers follow the law of Microsoft? You know, that doesn't make sense, right? So that's why it's really important to know what is the economies in Vietnam, where you want to go, and then crafting principles or best practices and have industry to regulate, or have public interest lawyer. But even to have public interest lawyer, you have to know the law well, know and have the tool to do the investigation as well. So what I'm trying to say nowadays, what it demands is laser focus, more laser focus when you're talking about data privacy protections. Need to make sure the laws are truly going to work and it's truly empowering the individual themselves.
Dạ cảm ơn ạ. Cảm ơn giáo sư Xuân Hồng Nghĩa và ông Dinh Thăng Lai, rất là interact debate. Và bây giờ chúng ta sẽ nghỉ ăn trưa nhá. Chúng ta sẽ nghỉ ăn trưa đến 1:30. Đề nghị chúng ta sẽ quay lại đây vào lúc 1:30. Ăn trưa ở dưới tầng 1 ạ. Nhà hàng Sài Gòn Cà phê ở dưới tầng 1 ạ. Xin mời các anh chị xuống tầng 1 ăn trưa và chúc các anh các chị ngon miệng.